I'm sure it will come through from other contributors, is how erratic and non-permanent a lot of the changes are that have been made in the UK. So, and then in terms of where we're at, and again, three introductory points. One is, it is astonishing that on an issue as important as devolution, and certainly it was important to George Osborne in terms of the effort that Treasury put into it, there isn't a single or an integrated document. So nowhere is there a national document explaining what the current government's policy is, which is pretty abnormal, and one that leaves an awful lot of questions and also limits the quality of some of the overall debate. So in 2015, in September, all sorts of areas were invited to submit devolution proposals, and over 30 areas of England submitted proposals for devolution. The east of England is the last non-urban or non-metropolitan area that actually has a devolution proposal alive, and that is still subject to decisions, because in the case of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, all 7 councils will be meeting the week after next, and it's still dependent on the democratic decisions of all of those. So, so there are 8 organisations involved. The other organisation is the Greater Cambridge, Greater Peterborough LEP. There are also important linkages on this geography, because when I came to Cambridgeshire, I worked as the first sort of waste and recycling officer for the combination of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And my view is there's still an entity between those 2 authorities, in the sense that it makes geographical sense. Cambridge was the only one of 23 councils that resisted the proposal for a 3-county devolution, which was the running proposal in March, after the government said that was the kind of devolution they favoured. So this is the entity of 7 councils, but it's also the area of the health funding. It's the area of the clinical commissioning group. So it's the health area. It's also the police area and the fire area, and the LEP follows broadly this area, albeit that it also includes further districts that are within the growth area of Cambridgeshire. So these were the objectives that were put together, and in part these objectives are influenced by the dialogue with government. Government has been proposing and focusing on devolution, particularly out of Treasury, and with a focus on growth and regeneration. So you'll see here a large amount of wording about housing, about transport, about skills, but also at the bottom, I'm particularly looking at some of the devolutions that will be covered by other speakers. It references some of the other challenges. We've got a major challenge, not just of a growing population in Cambridgeshire, but also an ageing population. So we've got a whole range of issues that we need to address that are not strictly to do with growth. And it is about money, because 72% of public finances are controlled centrally. We are not going to have any core grants as a district council by 2020. There is a clear funding crisis in social care and health, and arguably a huge policy vacuum in that area nationally. So we've got some opportunities, including in aspects like business rate retention. I could go into all of the meetings. Certainly we've been discussing devolution. I mean, the City Council has been discussing devolution for probably 4 or 5 years in different ways, and that's spawned the City deal. But it also has been a whole range of meetings which, until about a year ago, were largely on a county basis. So Cambridgeshire councils and Cambridgeshire input was on a county basis, and similarly in Norfolk and Suffolk. So this is the sort of 2015 timetable. But that was hijacked by government in a way, because government then decided that it wanted at least to push for a 3-county arrangement, and that was their proposition on 15th of February 2016. So out of it, and it was part of my resistance to the 3, and the City Council's resistance to the 3-county deal, along with the LEP in Cambridgeshire was against that deal, to actually come up with a brother and sister deal. And out of that there is money up front, and some may say, well, that's just not enough, perhaps, to justify this change in governance. But there is money up front in terms of annual amounts for additional investment in infrastructure. There's control over skills budgets. There's the potential of wider transport projects and investment. And that's certainly one of the biggest motivators, is the potential to bring Network Rail and Highways England properly into the discussions. Plus there's this linkage with skills through to apprenticeships. And certainly for my political group and for the City Council, it really hinged on affordable housing. The biggest challenge we have no resource to address in Cambridgeshire, particularly in Greater Cambridge, is affordable housing. So originally the dialogue was about £100 million across the 3 counties, of which government said 85% would only be used for shared ownership or purchase type affordable housing. And it was only effectively by resistance, to the point that we hadn't signed a deal about 4 days before the deadline, that suddenly an offer came, particularly for £70 million for council housing. And that was a cash sum, because what the policy changes that we requested were contrary to Treasury's approach to housing. So it came in cash, £70 million, which, subject to the devolution agreement going ahead, will be invested in at least 500 council homes, and probably more. And it's a substantial sum of money. It's more than Cambridge City's had in 40 years. And it's against a backdrop which we haven't got time to go into, of all of the intricacies of housing finance, which are still heavily controlled down to Whitehall. But there's also £100 million sum for affordable housing for housing associations, and that is also targeted largely at Greater Cambridge. So the government says they're after devolution of decisions and responsibility from Whitehall, and I'm not going to preempt some of that because that will be addressed in the later discussion. And there's clearly some key issues on transport and on health, and also just in the future on funding. Where is this money coming from? It came from a special pot. It didn't apparently come out of other local government funding, but then government has cut local government funding. In terms of governance, and this is one of the areas of debate, the 7 authorities and the LEP are in the process of forming a shadow combined authority, but government has insisted that for there to be a deal, then an elected mayor is part of it, and clearly that's going to be discussed today. I won't go into that now. I do believe that there's a power shift in this from Whitehall, not a massive one, but a chunk of power. It has big impacts on the county councils and how they operate, particularly Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, and how they operate together. And I've used my words carefully in the last point. I perhaps need to clarify it. So there's no immediate take of power or impact on the district council, but that's not to underestimate the potential impacts. So, as it stood back in June, 4 of the Norfolk councils voted against devolution. In a way, quite late on, they didn't sort of signal that that was going to happen. But at that stage, Cambridgeshire had separated out, and the government continues to talk about a joint Suffolk and Norfolk devolution. But because those 4 in Orange didn't consult their residents or others in the summer, they've effectively voted themselves out of devolution in the rules that the government set, although some of that was pretty poorly communicated at the time. So what's going to happen? Well, the 7 Cambridgeshire councils will have a vote in a week, 10 days' time. The LEP's already voted in favour in terms of the local enterprise partnership. Norfolk County Council may vote against on Monday. It may be that that's the Norfolk view. Personally, I'd like to see a Suffolk deal. If there isn't going to be a Norfolk and Suffolk deal, Suffolk councils are united in their commitment to this process. There was a consultation in the summer. I cannot wholly defend a process that government has sort of pushed through with very fixed timetables. So there hasn't been, in a way, adequate democratic approval of some of this process, albeit that to some extent the public leave decisions to councillors to make on their behalf. I'm not saying that's the right way, but the public haven't marched against devolution. There have been views expressed. There's different views about it. So there was clear efforts by all of the councils to raise awareness, undertake surveys, get feedback online, also get other feedback via meetings in the summer. A Murray poll, broadly a representative sample, 2,300 in Cambridge and Peterborough, said that from what they heard, and I'm not saying that that's a very well-informed judgment, that devolution was supported, as was a combined authority and a mayor. Not such a happy response, including from people concerned about the mayor and some of the online responses. So there is concern about what this mayoral role will play. I haven't gone into my view in the morning. I'll save that for later. At least I have something to say this afternoon. And then in terms of a process, if the council say yes, the government needs to respond by the end of November. There's proposals for a combined authority being established in February. Some of the first funding comes through then, and there would be a mayoral election on the same day as the county council elections, May next year. So it could be that Cambridge and Peterborough is the only sort of non-metropolitan, non-urban devolution deal that goes ahead. It's still subject to some decisions, and I've basically summarised there some of the features. And so I presume, Josh, this might go up online later.
Yes, yeah, that's intentional.
So some of the reasons, and I'll save some of this for the afternoon, is that I have, through my experience of being a councillor, through having to deal with Whitehall, I realise that it's not a simple task discussing and resolving issues with Whitehall, but I think it's a task worth taking on. I believe there are opportunities for Cambridge and Peterborough which mean that we should go ahead, and it's not just the housing funding. I just think there are opportunities, particularly on issues like transport, where we have to engage with Network Rail, with Highways England, with the government on a far more strategic level. As a place, Cambridge is at the centre of, it doesn't have any influence, but it's at the centre geographically of 6 counties, and we have to work with other people. And as I'll say this afternoon, a central part of our agenda throughout the last few years, which we've built on since we've been running the council for the last 2, is about partnerships. We cannot achieve what is needed for the citizens of Cambridge, and also share the benefits of growth and make sure that Cambridgeshire as a whole is a fairer, better, more well-funded and well-resourced area, unless we engage with Whitehall. So that's my introduction. Thank you.